Welcome to Middle Fingers Up, the show where we hold our heads high and our middle fingers higher. I'm your host, Kieran McKay. Today, I have the pleasure of sitting down to chat with registered dietitian Sarah Howe McKenna of Howenutritious, which, by the way, is a very clever name. So let's welcome Sarah and find out more about Howenutritious. How are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Good. Look at all the hows we're using. It's like we're just like dropping your plug every 5 seconds.
In elementary school, every kid would be like, Sarah, how are you? They're like, yeah, I've never heard that before.
I've never heard that, right? I love it. Well, I want to ask you about how you started this, but before we do that, I'd like to get to know you a little bit. Well, I know you. I'd like my listeners, our listeners, to get to know you a little bit. So let's chat about how we know each other. There's how again. See, it's going to like, we should count how many times. There we go. Again, there it is. There it is. So we know each other a little bit.
We
right?
do. Yeah. Very well, I'd say.
We can thank our 2 children for being friends in kindergarten, met in kindergarten.
It's true.
Yeah.
They brought us together.
They did, right? And also, I just recalled, you were one of my first ever introductions to doing spin. You were a spin instructor back in the day.
My side gig.
Yes, yes. I always remember your one pair of leggings, the moon ones, right?
I still have those. They've lasted forever.
Those were great. 5:30 a.m. with you on Wednesday mornings. I remember that.
It was a good time.
It was. You were good. You were fast. You were good.
I enjoyed it. I was sorry to say goodbye to it, but I had to work more at my, quote, real job.
Yeah. Well, and also we had the opportunity of really not meeting each other until you actually met my brother a little bit before you met Carrie and I.
I did.
We
met on the school playground. We had kindergarten pickup every morning at 10:46 because that's half day when half day kindergarten ends. Yeah. It's 10:45 in the morning.
Right.
And he was always standing there alone.
The 6'3", big bearded brown guy standing there and picking up the kids, and you were great. You guys started getting to know each other.
Yeah, he was lonely. So we started chatting and the boys were friends. So I had him over for lunch a couple of times and hang out during the day.
I love it. Like play dates with you.
Yes. Cam and I would hang out while they ate lunch, and he would talk to me about various things. I actually don't remember what they were now, but I know my husband wasn't a super big fan of it. Yeah. 25-year-old single man coming to hang out during the day. But I was like, he's so lonely, Connor. You don't even know how lonely he is. Yeah. He just needs to talk to another adult during the day.
Yeah, totally, right? As anyone that's hanging out at home, hanging out with kids, you kind of go stir crazy. So I know he was always he has a lot of respect for you and Connor. He really appreciated how you guys were so open. Because when Connor got to meet him, then you get to meet Cam, you're like, oh, okay.
He wasn't worried anymore. But he didn't fit in, right, on the playground. Yeah. Because it was mostly other parents or sometimes grandparents or sometimes nannies. And he wasn't really any of those things. Yeah, and he did ask me, he's like, Sarah, do you think the other moms don't talk to me because they think I'm a Muslim? Yeah. And I was like, no, it's because you're a 25-year-old single man. That's why they don't talk to you.
They don't know how to talk to you. Yeah, I think he and I, when we moved here, we were a little like, oh, this is a little out of our usual community, right? Being at that time, I was like one of the lone Indian family. We were lone Indian families. And people would come up and be like, I know you. I'm like, I don't know you. Oh, I met you through someone else, because the only token brown girl. So people would be like, oh, Kieran, whatever. And so Cam kind of introduced me to all of Xander's friends' parents, because like you, he would get to know a couple of other moms. Mm-hmm. There's Eileen. There's a few that during pickup and, we'd get to know. And I was very appreciative that my brother sort of moved over, put his life on hold at such a young age to be our man. We called him our manny. So it was the nannies and then the manny picking up the boys.
And he was so good at it. Like, you know,
was.
My own child loves him and calls him Uncle Cam. Like he was really good at being a primary caregiver.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, we were very grateful. And when we see the connection that he and the kids have today, it just melts my heart. And he does the same. He maintains the same connection with my sister's kids that are out in Surrey. But also, like, this is not like the Cam show. Let's not. A couple weeks ago, we recorded the 25th episode, and I got nothing but roasted by him. And here I am as his big sister sitting here telling him how awesome he is. So
being so kind to him.
I know. I don't know why I'm doing that. So let's stop talking about him. If he was here, he would have done a top 5 with you. So that's too bad. He'll have to
next time.
He'll have to text you one. You know. Okay, so let's talk about you a little more about the Howenutritious. So how did Howenutritious start up?
So I thought of the name probably 8 or 9 years ago, and I had a different private practice going at the time. And I was like, son of a gun, why didn't I think of this name when I started the first private practice? And then I started working more at my real job, which is at the time I was working at Q in the hospital, in the hospital, obviously, in Calgary.
Yeah.
And so I shut my private practice down, and then in 2019, I became a manager of dietitians at a number of different sites in Calgary and outside of Calgary. And then COVID came.
Yes.
And I was like, well, this is terrible. So in last year, I started thinking a little bit more about starting up my private practice again. And then I went back to a job where I do patient care. So I'm not a manager anymore.
Right on.
Yeah. Yay. Babies. I get to hold babies again.
Man.
And then, but I still really wanted to do something with adults and something where I'm working against diets and people going on diets for weight loss. And so I got certified in a program called How to Eat, which, no joke, took me 6 months to make the connection between Howenutritious and How to Eat. I was like, wait, it takes me a while to process sometimes. But it was a really amazing course that I took, and it was kind of, I felt like I was a dietitian again instead of being a manager, which being a manager is a really hard job.
Yeah, tell me about it, man.
And a huge shout out to people who love it and do it well, because it is hard work.
Yeah.
So
leaders eat last. Right?
Yeah.
So
I decided it was not for me, and I'm a team lead at my day job, and then I have a little bit of sort of management stuff running my own business.
Yeah, that's cool. So what's your hope? What's your goal with starting up your private practice?
Really just helping support people if they want to move away from diets, but they're not really sure how. Because often so many of us have grown up with, like, that's what you do. You want to get healthy, you go on a diet.
That's right.
It works for a little while. It doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
You go back to the way that you ate before, because, like, it's hard to change your habits and your behavior.
Tell me
Super
about it.
hard. So I wanted to be able to provide people with somewhere they could go to do this. It's a very structured approach, the How to Eat program, and you do focused eating exercises. And I loved that because that was not something I'd ever done before. Everything I've sort of done before was around talking. We still talk lots, but we also do actual exercises to help reduce people's anxiety and stress when it comes to food. And we do those together. We eat together.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, it was it's a super interesting program, and I was so glad I ran across it and then was able to take the course, and it fit in nicely with some of the stuff I was already doing.
Yeah.
I did a lot with intuitive eating.
What's that?
That is a similar idea in that you want people to move away from diet culture. It's just a different approach, and it's a little less structured. Nothing wrong with it, and there's great, I'd say they're both great programs. Just it depends on the person and what they're kind of looking for.
Right.
I think How to Eat is a better fit for someone who has a lot of anxiety around letting go of diet culture, and intuitive eating can also be used there too, but is maybe more for people who are ready to let go.
Cool. Like the next phase, your next step, hey? I really appreciate that there is a program like this out there, and for someone like me who's talked about struggling with my own eating issues as well as body image growing up, and talking to other people over the last few episodes, there's always something connected to how we eat and why we eat it. There's a psychological piece to it. There's rituals, cultural customs, all sorts of things that can sometimes make it a little more complicated. And it's sad because we need to eat. So it's not like it's something that we're not all thinking about. At some point in the day, we all have to look at the clock and think, oh, I got to eat this. It's time to eat. So what I like and what I'm hearing about your program is that you're sort of teaching or maybe reteaching some of us that have scary habits or poor habits, or like you said, just don't know what to do. You mentioned diet culture, and I want to get there in a second. Before we do that, I want to ask you a little bit more though. You're a registered dietitian. So what is the difference between that and being a nutritionist? Is that the same thing or?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in Alberta, nutritionist is a protected title, and that only came to be a few years ago. So it used to be that anybody could call themselves a nutritionist. They could read a book, they could take a course, they could do none of those things and just decide that they're a nutritionist.
Right.
And now it's protected by the College of Dietitians of Alberta. So to be able to call yourself a nutritionist, you need to be a registered dietitian.
Okay.
And some people don't know that, and they're still using nutritionist without having that background. But it's a question worth asking for people who are looking for nutrition support. We've gone to university. We have a degree generally in nutritional sciences. We do a 9-month internship where we actually practice the job for 9 months with supervision before we enter the workforce. So that's the difference between a registered dietitian and
a nutritionist.
What some people think of as a nutritionist.
Yeah, because I honestly would have just, like, I've been calling you a nutritionist because that's all I've known as well. So I appreciate you clearing that up, that there's a difference there. What inspired you to go to dietitian school?
Well, in high school, my mom was a nurse.
Okay.
And so healthcare was sort of always interesting to me. And I job shadowed my family doctor.
Oh.
And
in high school?
In high school for a day. He came and picked me up at my house at 6:00 in the morning, and I was with him for like 12 hours.
Did you live in some small town?
I lived in Medicine Hat, Alberta.
Oh, yeah. Okay, there you go.
And then I job shadowed the dietitian at the hospital. My mom knew her, so she asked her if I could job shadow her. Mm-hmm. And I was also interested in becoming a midwife. But in the end, midwifery lost, because at the time, I think one of the only programs was in Sudbury, Ontario.
Oh, yeah. And you have to travel.
I wanted to travel to like a big city.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. Yeah.
And then I just decided I did not have the passion for medicine that I think you really need.
Yes.
It's so much work.
Yeah.
It's so hard.
Yep.
And I just didn't feel like I had that drive that really like great physicians have.
Right.
So I decided to become a dietitian. I really liked what the dietitian did when I job shadowed her. It seemed fun. You chat to people, you talk about food, you talk about your feelings around food, and I really enjoyed that.
So what was the talk about food for you growing up?
I don't remember a lot of talk around food. But I do remember reading Shape magazine at the age of 8 and being very interested in the before and after stories, which I now think, looking back on it, I'm like, I had an interest even then as a kid.
Yeah.
My mom had 4 daughters, and I never heard her talk negatively about herself or the way that she ate. So that I think was really helpful as teenage girls growing up. So I don't really remember a lot of talk around food. We always had dinner together as a family. That was really important to my parents. And so we did that every night.
You do that too, because my son loves coming over for dinner at your place. He loves how you guys all come to the table and the food's all there we all eat different, right? We eat together, but we serve it different. And so he's always like, I love how we have supper at Fergus's place. And so it's so cute to kind of hear that you're sort of carrying that out.
And I remember as a teenager just having really amazing conversations at the table, and you could talk about anything. Mm-hmm. My mom was a nurse, so her threshold for like gross stuff was high.
Yeah.
I have had to remind my kids a couple times, like, we don't talk about these things at the table outside of this house.
So when you go to Xander's house for dinner,
don't talk about gross things at the table. So I have definitely carried that forward. I think it's for us, it's really important. Mm-hmm. And my husband grew up the same way. Interestingly, they also ate together.
Right.
So it's important to him too.
Yeah. Do you think that makes a difference?
I think so. I think when you come from similar food cultures, backgrounds, and I mean culture is like a family sense, not necessarily like a nationality sense.
Right.
It can make it a little bit easier when you're raising your own kids because you value some of the same things.
Yeah.
I taught this class called Mealtime Struggles for 13 years, and we had case studies or like little examples in the class. And one of the examples I loved the most was like, mom told the child this, and then dad turned around and was like, nope, we're doing this totally differently. And it was a really great way to open up the conversation in the class around like how we come from different food backgrounds. And sometimes we don't always realize that the way that we do it is not necessarily, quote, normal, that everybody has their own normal.
Yeah.
And we have to talk about these things.
Right. And what works for you.
Yeah.
So you're talking about sitting at the table and eating, and I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts about sitting around the TV and eating supper?
Generally, I wouldn't recommend it every night.
Yeah.
Because you don't get that same conversation.
Yeah.
So when you're sitting around the table without screens, you get that opportunity to talk a lot more.
Yeah.
We try to talk about our favorite part of the day.
Yeah.
Sometimes people are resistant. They don't want to talk about their favorite part of the day.
Well, you have a couple of teenagers in your house and then a budding teenager. Oh my gosh.
I do.
Bless you, my dear.
They're pretty fun, actually.
Good for you.
They make great conversation.
Yeah.
That's the nice part about having older kids.
Yeah.
Little kids, it's a lot more grunt work at the table.
Right. And food in the hair. And
like trying to serve everybody or make sure that they're not like throwing it on the floor. So now it's a little bit easier.
Right. I love that. I love hearing that. When you went to your dietitian school, did they teach you, or did anything ever come up about nutrition plans for religions or cultures, or like even people who culturally fast? Was there any talk about that?
Fasting, no. Yeah. Cultures, yes.
Yeah.
I went to school in Montreal.
Yeah.
And it is a fairly multicultural city. So we did talk about that.
Yeah.
There's a Jewish General Hospital in Montreal. Right. And at the time, it was all kosher. So we also had kosher meals at other hospitals.
Right.
We didn't get into a lot of different cultural foods, but I was never taught, or I didn't notice that I was being taught that there was a certain way you needed to eat. Like we always seemed to talk about different cultural foods as being just as good as any other.
Right.
I think it's getting better.
Yeah.
Over the years, dietetics is a pretty white profession.
Yeah.
And so
I'm glad you said it.
It's true.
Well, I just think the whole Western and Eastern, right? Like I find it clashes, and I feel like both can work really well together when we figure it out. But yeah, like sometimes what one would eat in their, from their own cultural background may not be considered healthy on the Canadian food guide or whatever the food guide is. And so I'm curious. I have a couple of other questions when we get to I want to play a little game with you about busting some myths. So I'll wait for that. But I was just curious because, as you said, we're such a multicultural country, and so there's more than North American cultural foods and all that sort of thing. So it's nice to hear that you feel that it's getting better and it's being considered. And I would imagine you have your own way of approaching that. If I come to your business and ask for some help versus someone from a North American culture, would you look at things in a different way, or do you think we all have the same kind of struggles?
I would say that people generally have the same kind of struggles, but where I'm going to start from is going to be different for each person. Yeah. And I always want to start with, what do you eat now? Because there's no point in trying. First of all, I'm not going to change you. You're going to change you.
Yeah, well said.
So we are going to start from, where are you now and where do you want to go and how do we get there?
Yeah.
But I think even with research, I had a patient with Crohn's disease asking if they should change from their traditional diet to the Mediterranean diet, because there is a lot of research around the Mediterranean diet.
Okay.
And so they are from India. And I said, I feel like traditional Indian food is probably just as good for you as the Mediterranean diet.
Yeah.
We just don't have a lot of studies done on traditional. And I mean, of course, there's differences depending on where you're from in India.
That's right. Yeah.
So I said, no, I would not change the way that you eat based on trying to transition to the Mediterranean diet, but just focus on what do you want to eat of your traditional foods? Are they minimally processed? Like for the Crohn's disease, that can be really important.
Right.
And trying to work on some of those things.
Yeah.
But definitely, I think even in research, then I looked into it to see if anyone has actually studied Indian diets for Crohn's disease, and I could not find anything.
Yeah. Oh, well, maybe there's something there. Right?
Yeah.
I have a friend who is living with Crohn's, and he actually, I remember, and I haven't seen him for years, but I remember my mom was visiting, and he and his wife came over, and so I was cautious of what he could eat because I wanted him to be part of mealtime. And he's like, "Oh, your mom's cooking?" He's like, "Great." He's like, "I can manage Indian food so well. It for whatever, I think it's, I don't know, whatever, low carb or whatever it is that he found that helps him." So I was like, maybe, there you go. Maybe he's patient zero to go back and do something.
For sure, everybody has different levels of tolerance.
Right. Well, and I think that's what I'm really excited to talk to you about. But I also want to get into, the link of mental health and eating, and we will get there, in just a little bit, because I think there's so many things that maybe we're struggling with that we don't even recognize in the day. And sometimes there are things that we're doing when we're eating that we also don't realize are helping us. But because diet culture is telling us we shouldn't be eating that, we think, oh, I should quit that. Okay, so I also wanted to ask you, what's the biggest surprise you learned entering this field?
I don't know about entering the field, but about 10 years in, I went to a presentation where they talked about how weight loss isn't necessarily necessary.
Oh.
And
okay.
It was like mind-blowing to me because, of course, up until that point, my whole, I learned this in school, you just have to put people on diets, you need to help them lose weight, this is what we need to do to be healthy. Right. And then all of a sudden someone came and was like, but is it though?
Yeah.
And it really started making me think about everything differently, that if I had always been presented with this as a fact, and I believed it as a fact, that I needed to do a little bit more critical thinking about what I'm actually doing in my practice. So right. Even at the time I had my previous private practice, I would give people meal plans and calorie goals and all that stuff when they came to me and they wanted that. And then after I saw that presentation and did so much reading, I was like, well, I can't do that anymore. Mm-hmm. Ethically, I cannot support this approach. Mm-hmm. So that really changed things for me. And it changed my whole career because I no longer will just do things because that's the way that we've always done them or that's the way I was taught to do them. I'm always like, but why though? Mm-hmm. But why? And looking into what actually supports this practice versus it's just the way that we're used to doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen people that probably took a certificate and maybe weren't a dietitian, had personal training experience, that kind of stuff. And so it's like a printout. Have, these fruits, have these vegetables, eat this or eat that. And it was always the same. Mm-hmm. And throughout the years. And I grew to have a love-hate relationship with that because it's also boring.
Yes.
If you're trying to fit everyone in the same box, first of all, the box is going to be full. You can't cram everyone in there. And second of all, not everyone is meant to fit in there. But I also think that's the same reason why some of us struggle with the newest fad, the newest diet, because sometimes, again, we find something that works temporarily. And it's just like the client that you talk to from India, trying to adjust their whole lifestyle, their eating to fit a different eating style. And you had mentioned a few minutes earlier, what are the chances? How realistic is it that you're going to keep carrying that out? And so a lot of what I hear you saying is what is realistically going to work for you? And like you said, you make the change. And so if you're going to completely change the way you eat, I would need help with, like you said, that critical thinking of how is that going to sort of be sustainable? How are you going to live with that forever or whatnot? Is that possible? And what happens when you can no longer eat that way? Then what? Preparing us, because sometimes, you'll probably just cringe, but slim fast diets, and there are so many diets I can tell you that I've done over the years, and they totally work for a very short period of time, but I was never prepared for what happens after they don't work. And then you just feel like shit and eat shit because you're like, nothing's going to work.
And I think that goes back to this fundamental assumption that weight loss is possible.
Yeah.
And it isn't possible for everyone. And it isn't possible long term for most people.
Yeah.
Most people cannot lose more than about 10% of their body weight and keep that off. And if you look at research around weight loss, there's nothing past 2 years because nothing works forever.
So I don't know if you heard, I had a body image episode with Doreen Chin, and we both talked about just the cultural customs. Like she had the Chinese culture, I had the Indian culture, and so food was such a big part of both of our cultures, and that was wonderful on one hand, but also created this complex for us. And she joined Jenny Craig. She lost a significant amount of weight and then ended up being one of their poster childs, and her face was in every facility. And then she ended up winning a contest and being flown to LA and part of this whole commercial campaign, new wardrobe, all these things. So it was so sexy to lose all this weight, and she was being rewarded, she talked about. But she also talked about how she had to sign a contract, and there was like 1 to 2 year contract where she could not gain that weight back. And her and I both talked about that was sign number 1, because we can't sustain it.
No. And it's really challenging for people because we're sold this personal responsibility narrative, and well, if you can't do it, that's your fault. That's on you. And it's like, no, maybe the underlying premise is wrong. It's not actually a question of personal responsibility. And I know people don't like to hear that. Even people who want to lose weight don't like to hear that, because our culture is horrible to people in bigger bodies. And I don't have a bigger body. I can't speak for what it's like to live in a bigger body, but I can see how they are treated in our society.
Totally.
On Instagram, on Facebook, like all the social media. When I had my first baby, I remember going to the grocery store, and there was one of those reality stars.
Oh.
The first Bachelorette, I want to say.
Oh, like Tristan and what's her name?
Yes, her.
I feel like they're still together. They were the OG ones. Yeah. What was her name?
But it was like she'd had a baby 6 weeks prior, and she was on a magazine cover in a bikini, and they were like, it only took 6 weeks to get back to your pre-baby body. And I was just like, well, like, why is that the focus? I just gave birth to a human being. And I'm like barely functioning at 6 weeks postpartum, never mind frantically trying to lose the rest of that weight that I gained when I was, creating human life.
Trista. I had to find out what her name was. That makes me want to puke, because it just brings me back to my baby losing weight days. And I always look to celebrities, and it was sad. It's sick, but it's in my face all the time. And it's like, if she can do it, why can't I? So obviously, if she can do it, I have to be able to do it. And then it's my fault because I can't do it. So I'm doing something wrong. And like to drop it that quickly, or to even be expected to drop it
to have to think about it then.
Like you just
why does it matter?
A baby, you're going through a life change and all that, and now we're worried because we look a certain way. And I agree. I have so much respect for the younger generation. Like, your daughters are part of that generation where there's a lot of change happening with these young kids that are really voicing and challenging our generation and the ones, before us, about how we expect people to look and to be. And I have so much respect for that, because my generation went along with it. This is what was expected. And it's like you said, you go into that seminar and you're like, wait a minute. Thank you for questioning. But is this how it has to be? But why is a beautiful question. But why do I have to look this way? Why can't I be healthy in the way that I am healthy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think our kids are exposed to way more toxic media than we were exposed to. Mm-hmm. We had magazines for sure. And TV and actresses. Like, when I was growing up, Ally McBeal was on TV, and those women were just thin. Rail thin.
Yep.
But my daughters are exposed to so much on Instagram and TikTok, and so I think they do ask more questions. Yeah, filters. You can Photoshop any photo. Like, most of them are not even real.
Yeah.
I think I don't think they believe it. I hope not. We talk about it.
Yeah.
My daughter asked me about getting a 6-pack at one point, and I was like, you know, despite what the internet tells you, not everyone's body can have a 6-pack.
Yeah.
You can have a very strong core.
That's right.
But that does not mean that you have a 6-pack, and it's not realistic to expect that everybody can.
That's exactly it. And I'm appreciative that you and your kids are having those conversations, and I think that's a lovely way to role model that our kids are curious, they're watching, and even if they're not talking to us about it, they're processing it some way. And so helping bring it out, and whether that's sitting at the table together and just role modeling. Without anxiety, we're eating. It's okay that we're having the pizza. We don't have to worry about the carbs. It's okay that we're gonna eat this thing over here, that thing over there, and you know, we're still going to balance it with whatever. I think those things are so important because I necessarily didn't reach out and talk about those things as a kid growing up, and I created a lot of fake stories in my head because I thought that's how it's supposed to be. And I think now when I go back and talk to little me all the time, it's like just reminding myself that, okay, we're educated every day. We have a lot more science out there. We have a lot more people that are paying attention to things like that. You know, I do appreciate on social media the real and the not real pictures that started a few years ago with fitness instructors and people that, you know, this is how we pose, but this is how we really look all the time. You can't look like your stomach's flat all the time. That's not how that works. You eat something it's going to come. And those things as a grown woman to hear were so empowering. Like, thank you. Because I thought I was abnormal, that every time I ate, it looked like I had a meatball sub, or that I'm 6 months pregnant, right? And yeah, we're all different. And I think we have to just keep sending that message. And that's the basis of this passion project. How do we get that out there so people can hear that and maybe pass that along to someone else? But if anything, just for themselves, starting with ourselves, with how do I build a relationship with food? How do I build a relationship with what is healthy? And that's part of why you're here. So I'm going to pause for a second and do our middle fingers up, and then we're going to get into more of sort of this little intro that we just did, more questions I have for you. We mentioned diet culture, and we're going to get into that. So I'm a little anxious with the middle fingers segment because I forgot to do it when I was starstruck with the hockey night in Canada, Punjabi's edition, Harpreet been there. And I didn't realize I was starstruck until I started talking. I'm like, oh God, he's a bigger deal than I've been letting on. I got to be a little more perfect. And then I completely forgot. So now every time I'm like, we got to get to middle fingers up. So let's do it. So what did you bring today? What do you want to put your middle fingers up?
I'd like to put my middle fingers up to election polls and coverage of same, because we are in election, as you know, for
provincial
election. And every day I see breathless coverage of who is polling ahead, depending. And I'm like, guys, if there's anything we learned from 2016, it's that polls do not work. We cannot predict what is going to happen. So we just need to forget about these like breathless predictions and just focus on promoting democracy. Get out to vote. That's your job.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's exactly it. I'm glad you brought that up. I got my registration stuff. This year, there's 2 of me in the household. So last year I was like Kieran Dweeb. This year I'm Kieran Deeb. Oh. And then I'm also Kieran Rendawa. So I have 2 names, which is lovely. And Carrie and I are like, come on, people, get it right. Like, this is not encouraging me to want to go vote. Come on, right? So I had a funny little laugh about, I can't wait till what next time is. So, well, yeah, I think it's a good point about, let's just get out there and do our research, figure out what works, and get out there and do it versus all the other noise that gets put out and commercials and all sorts of things, right?
Absolutely.
So, yeah. Well, thank you for that. I had a low week last week. I was under the weather, and shocking how our physical and our mental well-being are connected. So when you're physically not well, mentally it's a strain. And so I had a really, really low week, not feeling well. And my middle fingers are going up to this need to be in control. So being sick is a really good example. There's things that you just can't control while you're sick. These things are happening. And so it was a nice reminder and a lesson for me as I was reading my whole family's life that, okay, like what can I be in charge of versus trying to be in control right now? And so it was a nice shift of charge and control. And so I can't control the things that are happening right now around me, but I can definitely be in charge of how I respond. And it was just a very nice reminder. And as soon as that happened for me, my like anxiety starts to go down. I decide, oh, maybe I do need to talk. So I start telling my husband what's on my mind. I reached out to a lovely friend who's always there, willing to listen. And I thought, okay, my middle fingers have to go up this week to charge and control are two different things. So for me, focusing on being in charge versus trying to control an outcome that just was not possible.
Good self-awareness.
Well, hopefully I have some if I try to host a show, right? So yeah, and I think it's just, we forget. And I was feeling bad because I'm like, I'm a host of this mental health podcast, and why can't I get my shit together? Like, why can't I do better? What's going on? And I think it's just a reminder, and this is part of why I'm sharing it, is I'm not perfect. I'm so far from it. I'm learning. I'm doing the best I can. And sometimes we fall back. Paula Abdul used to say two steps forward, one step back.
2 steps forward, one step back.
Right?
We go together like opposites attract.
That's right. Yeah. That's a great song. Great song. And I think it's just it was a good reminder. So it's like, I want to share this so that folks out there know, like we all have ups and downs. And I think it's just it's a nice check to get back on track with, okay, what can I be in charge of? So I stopped ruining my household's lives when I was in charge of my anxiety and my emotions. And now we're all on track for now.
My favorite quote that I learned recently is, perfection is the enemy of good. And I think that you have reflected on that a little bit. Can't be perfect.
No.
Just have to be good enough.
Good enough. Yeah. I'll take number 2. I'll take number 3. I'll take last, I'll take whatever, but yeah, I don't want first. And I think that's a good reminder of, that striving for something that just is not like, what are you going to do when you're sick? How are you going to get better?
I hear you. I have no patience for illness. I'm patient for about 2 hours of my illness. And then I'm like, well, this is terrible.
Why is this not going away? What the heck?
When am I going to be cured?
Yeah. Hello. I took 2 Advil. Why am I not suddenly better? Right. So yeah, I think it's a good reality check. All right. I'd love to break some common myths. I think folks that are listening may have some similar thoughts. And so these are things that have been on my mind. I'd like to ask you a couple of things here. Can you break down some of these common myths about eating habits and food? What is the whole, I'd like to talk about the kids are wound up because they had sugar. Is this true?
It is not true.
Oh, myth busted.
Myth busted. I know. There's been a lot of research on this actually because everybody thinks it, and sugar does give you energy, right? Like that's what it's for. It's to give you energy. So everybody thinks that it makes kids hyper, but they've done a lot of research. It's often our perception of kids as being wound up because they've had sugar. It's often the environment that they're in, like they're wound up at birthday parties and late night family gatherings when everyone's there and all wound up. So it is more so likely the environmental context in which the sugar is being given than the sugar itself.
Right.
They've even done studies where they tell parents that they gave their kids sugar, but they actually didn't. And the parents rate their behavior as being more hyper than they did when they... So it is a lot of our perception.
I'm so glad to hear you say that. I was a little curious about, if you're going to say yes, but because I do that. And Carrie and I have been talking, we're like, this can't be every time that it's the friggin' sugar, because we all crash at some point, right?
I also think that people forget about caffeine. Yeah. And that there's caffeine in a lot of the things that kids get sugar in too. And so then... caffeine does give you more energy and potentially makes you a little bit hyped up.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That's a good one. All right. Okay. So Canada's guidance on alcohol and health has stated that having more than 2 drinks a week is excessive. So I'm curious about what your thoughts are about this. And before you answer, because we talked about this earlier about different cultures, like Canada's saying this, but then you go to Europe and drinking wine is part of the culture, and you go to different countries and having a drink or couple or socializing or what is part of the culture. And so I'm curious about our Canadian culture, and I read this recently and I thought, oh, okay, that's interesting. So what would your perspective be on that?
I thought it was really interesting, and I actually did not expect them to go so quickly, because this research has been coming for a while. Alcohol causes cancer.
Yeah.
Alcohol actually doesn't lower your risk of heart disease. Like, they've been re-looking at a lot of this research out there.
Yeah.
So I figured they would adjust the previous recommendations, which I think were 1 drink a day for women and 2 drinks a day for men.
Right. And this is now 2 a week.
I know.
Saying.
It's like a big change.
Yeah. What do you think that's about?
I think it's partly, I mean, there is the cancer research that's out there.
Yeah.
I think it's also people use alcohol
Yeah.
to medicate themselves and numb themselves for various reasons. And maybe they're trying to help with that. I'm not sure if that's part of their motivation or not.
Right. Yeah.
But I did think it was very interesting. It did not change my own drinking behavior, but my own drinking behavior was already not that many drinks a week.
Yeah,
so
I'm with you too. Yeah.
I think if you were someone who drank a couple of drinks a day, might be worth looking at your behavior and just seeing, like, does this resonate with me? Is this something that I'm interested in working on or changing?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I when I read that, and I'm with you too. Like, I wouldn't say like I drink often, let alone 2 or 3 drinks a day. But to hear 2 a week, I was like, oh, well, that's like, I'm curious how many households would say, oh, yeah, that's like pretty much what I do, because it definitely didn't seem that way during COVID, let alone gatherings that we have frequently, right? So I thought, oh, this is interesting. And then just a clash with culture. Like, I'm with you with alcoholism, and that's an extreme, and that I'm not talking about that. I'm not hearing you talk about that too. And I am hearing you say, it's fair for all of us to just look at these things. Am I using this for other reasons? Is it recreational? How often it is? I smoke weed, and so those are things that I do every now and then. I take a break. I'm on a break right now, just because it's good to do that every now and then, and flush it out or whatnot. And also, I like to do a check-in of, am I utilizing it for more than recreation? Like, is there something that I need to go and take care of? And maybe that's why I ruined my family's life this week. I don't know, but maybe I need to go and look at that. But I just thought 2 a week, like, what is a percentage of people in the households that would be following that?
I think there's a lot of people that don't drink at all.
You think so? Yeah.
I mean, I do meet those people. They exist out there.
Yeah.
I think also to consider that nutrition research is hard. There's a lot of associations. You can't really do like randomized controlled trials for people's whole lives and then kind of see at the end what happens. So there's a lot of like associative research, correlations, looking at patterns over time. They have like the Harvard Health, I think it's the Harvard Nurses Study, where they have like 30,000 nurses that they follow. There's a lot of different ways of doing nutrition research. I think this is probably part of it. And recommendations change all the time.
Yeah.
We learn more. We look at things differently. Hopefully we're getting better methods and getting better at it. And that's what's contributing to some of these changes.
Right.
But I don't know enough about the research that went into these recommendations. Like, I know some of it, but to say definitively like, oh, absolutely, this is it. I think it's always worth taking everything with a grain of salt. So I tell my patients, you should take everything with a grain of salt, including me telling you this right now.
Yeah. And they go home and take a literal grain of salt. Like, she said
might
to have a grain of salt. So, okay. Well, that one's, good to know that. And okay, so does an apple a day keep the doctor away, Sarah?
I think there are people that have looked at this. I mean, eating fruit is good for you.
Yes.
There's no way around it.
Yeah.
Fruit and vegetables. They are good for you.
Can you overdo it? Can you have too much fruit and too much vegetables?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Like, you need everything, right? It's a balance. One of my kids in health class in grade 5, on her report card, they talked about how she had pointed out that if you just ate cucumbers, you would get sick because you need to eat everything.
Yeah.
And her gym teacher was very impressed that she knew that. I was like, oh, I'm so happy that you said that.
And you're not just eating cucumbers.
Yeah. So can you overdo it on fruits and vegetables? For sure.
Yeah.
Do many people? No.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're expensive,
Yeah.
right?
Oh my gosh. That is the other thing. Exactly. We're going to talk about that. Trying to eat well, and yet if you can't afford it, how do like we all need to eat, and yet it's so expensive to go buy a mango or whatever vegetable you need or whatnot. And so I think that's also part of why some people may opt out of the longevity of eating well, if not, and also the quick fix. We're in such a fast pace society because we are also important, have so many things to get done that we grab and go. And so I think that's, were you going to add something to that? Or?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of privilege involved in being able to even think about your nutrition and to be able to care about it, right? There are a lot of people that do not have that kind of time.
Yeah.
And they have other priorities. I worked in a job in California where I worked with low-income pregnant women and babies and children. Mm-hmm. And most of them worked in like the fields, like picking strawberries and lettuce. And they lived in a house with 30 other people, and people slept in shifts, and everyone had to be quiet all the time. And those kids drank Capri Sun all day long because that kept them quiet. Yeah. And that had to be the priority, because otherwise they were going to get kicked out of their housing and have nowhere to live. Mm-hmm. So I learned a lot about life in that job.
Yeah.
And it also really was where I started thinking about this whole idea around personal responsibility and nutrition, because it's not all about personal responsibility. We have to have systems in place to help support people to be able to eat well.
Yeah.
Whether it's like subsidies or even just learning about eating well is important. So,
well, I know Carrie and I were talking about it, and we were both thinking it would be really good if we can, at school or at home, teach kids how to read the nutrition label. I didn't learn how to read the nutrition label until I started to focus. I'll get into it, but keto, people can say whatever they want about it. For me, what it did was help reset hormones, but also I learned a lot when I was following that diet, how to eat. I am so grateful because now I understand what is an actual carb and what is protein and fiber. So that's something that we all need. I know in my household we needed a lot, and we were just so uneducated on why it was important to have that in our diet and how it was helpful. And I now can look at labels and understand them in a different way of, okay, yeah, this is fine. Or you go to the supermarket and you think you're doing a keto diet if you go to Costco, and it's all shit ingredients that they put in there because it's great for money making. And it's like, that's not really how this lovely diet started for epileptic children back in the day to stop seizures. And now we're selling things that say keto on it, and it's all just fake sugar, which isn't any better. And so it's sad because we get caught in these things. But yeah, anyways, I thought, oh yeah, that's a good idea. We should start teaching the kids about labels so they can understand when they're grabbing Oreo packets or whatnot. And your son actually was the one that came one day. He witnessed my son and I having a little back and forth about, hey, like, put that chocolate, whatever, cookie away and grab a fruit. And your son says, in my house, we just don't buy it. So then it's not an argument.
We do buy chocolate cookies.
And I was like, you know what? You're so wise, because if it's there, you're going to likely go for it versus if it's not there. So I thought that was funny.
Yeah, I guess I would go with not teaching kids about labels, because I think a lot of it teaches them to focus on external things versus internal things. So I would, instead of focusing on teaching them labels, I would encourage them to focus on how do you feel
when you're eating.
So when all my kids were around 3, they were allowed to eat as much Halloween candy as they wanted.
Right.
And every single one of them that first year ate way too much Halloween candy, and they felt like garbage.
Yes.
And then the next year they would remind themselves, because I still let them eat as much Halloween candy as they wanted. Now they're older, so their threshold is higher.
Yeah.
They would remind themselves, like, oh, don't remember last year you got a stomachache, you didn't feel well.
Yeah.
Like, listen to your body.
Yeah.
And so I guess that's where I think we lose it sometimes, especially with kids, is we are trying to externally control how much they eat.
Yeah.
And we're not encouraging them to listen to their natural hunger and fullness cues, which they have.
Yeah.
And we, over time, society kind of overrides those for all of us.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like we're teaching ourselves to look at external things like fitness tracking apps or calorie tracking apps, or, oh, you should eat off a smaller plate because you'll eat less, which has been debunked, by the way.
Oh, look, there you go. Yeah,
there's another myth for you.
Yeah.
So I would encourage my kids, or anybody's kids, to really listen to themselves. One of the things I've been working on, it's so funny that he said that, because he loves Oreo cookies more than anything else.
And that was what it is, because my kids, I hate them, and my kids love Oreo cookies too, yeah.
So he started having Oreo cookies as a snack pretty often, and I was like, okay, if that's going to be your snack choice, that's fine, but you need to drink milk with it, because Oreo cookies are not going to keep you full all by themselves. So then he started drinking milk with it, and then lately I was like, okay, that's great. I'm so glad you're doing that. I've noticed that you're still hungry, and then you keep wanting more Oreo cookies. Fine. I want you to eat until you are satisfied, but why don't you add a banana or some berries or something along with your snack? And he has done that a few times.
Yeah.
And I think that's a skill, but really getting them to pay attention to how do you feel versus like, what is the components of this? Because we try to separate food, like we try to separate nutrients from food, and we can't. Like, we need to focus on the actual food.
I appreciate you said that. I have zero rebuttal to that, because I'm just having an aha moment. Like, very well said, because I think the external and the internal piece, also with behaviors too, with electronics, like, can I earn rewards and all these things, versus like, how do you feel good yourself and build your own self-esteem? I felt good that I did that thing, versus I felt good because my dad gave me $6 after I did that thing.
Yeah.
And I, when you say it, I think of it that way, and I think, yeah, that's brilliant, because I never tapped into how I felt after I ate. I only tapped into how good that donut was and how good it was, and I want more, more. And then you just kind of cut off I feel like shit afterwards, or I'm going to puke, or whatever kids do when they overeat junk food or whatnot. And I think that's a lovely way, because then when they're feeling crappy or whatnot, it's a nice conversation to go back. Like, where do you think that's from? I had Dr. Ryan on, a chiropractor, who talked a lot about the connection of mind and body, and his daughter was experiencing anxiety, and same sort of thing he shared about asking his teenage daughter, like, are you willing to just, for one day, like, let's just give it a go and try changing up how we're eating sugar and this junk food all day, versus putting some healthy nutrients in us, and see how we feel after that. And so when he shared that, I was like, this is now bringing me back to that of, yeah, that's a really good point of, oh yeah, I don't feel great about that. And we tend to remember that. Xander, I remember, had some sugary gummy candy one time. We were visiting my family in BC, and for whatever reason, he got really sick and vomited quite a bit. And he always will remember how he felt after he ate that, and he won't even touch those now.
Poor buddy.
But also like, oh, that's too much of those 5-cent candies or whatever, because I know now that I will be that way. And yeah, that's helpful. I'm learning a lot. Thank you for that.
No problem.
One more myth. So if you want to lose weight, stop eating at a certain time.
Yeah, that's a big one right now. There's a lot of intermittent fasting, time restricted eating, lots of things out there. And so if I have, and I have had a patient come or client come with that kind of thing in mind, and they're like, okay, but it worked. Yeah. And so I guess the question I always ask them is like, but is it because you weren't hungry? And so before you were eating when you weren't hungry, which is fine. Like, sometimes we eat when we're not hungry. That's part of life. We eat because we're enjoying the food, or we're in a social environment. There's lots of reasons to eat. It's not just about hunger.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's worth asking those questions to figure out, like, when am I eating because I'm hungry and when am I eating for other reasons?
Yeah.
And is that bothering you? So, like, are you eating when you're not hungry and then you don't feel good?
Yeah.
So then maybe stopping eating at a certain time helps to sort of break that habit and help you really assess, when do I want to eat so that I feel my best? Again, I shy away from it a lot because people are so focused on weight loss.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, again, it'll work in the short term.
Yeah. Yeah.
But most people can't do that kind of thing forever.
Yeah.
And so then you're going to be right back where you started.
Well, and is it possible that you build an immunity to it too if you're doing the same thing for such a long period of time?
I don't know.
Where it stops working?
There's a lot. Again, all nutrition research is pretty short term.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to say long term.
Right, right.
There's a lot of books out there
Yeah.
where people are writing about all this stuff and being like, yep, this is the answer. This is what you need to do. But when you look into it, like, there's not a lot of studies on this that say yes. Like, I was reading some stuff around, like, well, it's helpful for insulin resistance, but we don't actually know what is a normal insulin level. So, and nobody has their insulin levels measured. And I'm like, okay, so you're theorizing that it's because of insulin resistance, but you don't actually know. And if there's anything we've learned from nutrition research and health research over the years, it's that what makes sense, in quotation marks, isn't always right.
Yeah.
That it can often be quite harmful.
Right.
So again, if I'm not going to judge people if they want to try it, that's their choice. Again, you decide what you want to change and what you want to work on, and I'm going to provide support the best way that I can.
Yeah.
If that's how you feel best, I would say go for it. But I would always want to look at what is the underlying motivation.
Yeah.
I used to say, even in mealtime struggles, when parents would be like, but I just want them to do this. And I'd be like, okay, what's your motivation there? Why? Yeah. Why do you want them to do that? And then you can really get into, like, what's driving those behaviors. And if it's you want to lose weight and that's your goal and that's what you want to do, okay. But be aware that that will probably not last forever.
Right, right.
And what are you going to do from there? Right. Can we find a way of eating that makes you feel good without having to be restrictive or really rigid with rules?
Or anxious.
Yes. And that takes up a lot of brain space.
Yeah.
If you... Oh, no, I'm going to get all on my soapbox about that.
Go for it. Go for it. Go for it.
But when you think about how much effort goes into trying to force women, and it is still primarily women, into thinking about their appearance and what they look like, and are they too big and are they too small, and do their clothes look good, and do they need to do different makeup, and all of this stuff, what are we not thinking about? That all takes up a lot of room.
It does.
Plus, we have children that we're trying to raise. And probably we all have jobs as well that we're trying to do well. So what's left?
Yeah.
You know, we are left with not a lot of time to care for ourselves, to love ourselves, to do things that are good for ourselves, good for our relationships.
Yeah.
Good. You know, I really... That gets me really fired up.
I thank you for that, because there's people like me that are listening today that need to hear what you're saying more and more and more, so that we can start to believe it and start to work through some of the reasons why we are where we're at with this relationship, this complicated relationship with food. And I stay up on that. I'll give you a microphone right there, and stay on your soapbox and help us, because it is so much pressure. And when I was with Doreen and talking about some of the body image stuff, and I also did one with Stephanie, we talked about how much space is like up for rent in my head now. I have all this free space because I've been pushing and challenging myself to look at things different, especially for the sake of my kids. And maybe there's things that will be harder for me to change, but if I can start, maybe it'll help, again, my children and the household. And I know it helps my husband a lot too, because he sees things very different as well, in terms of the culture that men grow up in, with what women should look like and be like and all that. And we're all learning what healthy means to us. And so I need people like you, and I'm sure there's people listening to that need people like you to help us with where, you know, like, what's the question that you would pose at this point on your soapbox to help us reflect on what you're saying?
I think it's really important to ask, where does this thought come from? And so, again, this also takes up a lot of brain space. So you're not always going to be able to work on everything at the same time. And I think it's important that people don't feel shame around that either.
Yeah.
Everyone is doing the best that they can.
Yeah.
But just being able to ask, like, why do I think this? Where is this coming from? So, and I was very lucky. I did not grow up with a mom who talked negatively about herself or me. I never heard a negative comment.
Yeah.
It never occurred to me that other people would have thoughts about the way that I looked. Now, I also was slim and blonde, so I had advantages there too, right? I wasn't in a larger body. Yeah, that too.
You're my nemesis when I was a kid, Sarah.
So there's some advantages, right? Like I'm already starting at a point that I didn't think about those things. Ever. So I didn't talk negatively to myself. I always had a lot of confidence. Some might say undeserved self-confidence.
Oh, interesting.
But
Fuck that.
I know.
Confidence is undeserved. Well, I don't know, man, unless if...
Lord grant me the confidence of a mediocre white man. That's my favorite.
No doubt, man.
But I think it's important to just ask yourself, where is this coming from, without judgment. I learned in post-pandemic, I decided to not learn how to meditate, practice meditation. That was one of my first learnings. And in practicing meditation, you have to treat yourself without judgment. Your mind is not going to be empty. You're going to get distracted. You're going to start thinking about your grocery list or your like work project or whatever else. And you just have to notice that you're doing that and bring yourself back to whatever you were originally doing, whether it was breathing or whatever. And I think that can be used in so many situations when you're talking badly about yourself, when you're like, oh, I hate the way that I look in that picture. I hate this. I hate that. Like, where is that coming from? Like, what is behind that? And not to judge yourself for it, because society puts a lot of effort and a lot of money into trying to make us feel bad.
100%.
About the way that we look. I saw an article once where this woman was talking about going out without your nails painted was like the equivalent of going out like unwashed and covered in rags. And I'm like, you can see that these nails are not painted. And I was like, oh my God, like, why would you spend so much energy on this? Like, who cares what other people are doing with their fingernails?
I know. When you break it down, you're like, again, first world problems, man, because we have so much time and space in North America to think about these kinds of things, but we also have this time and space to, like, we have so much privilege with education and to live well. We're so blessed. Many of us are.
Not everyone, you're right.
Right, and yet these are the things that some of us think about with how I look, and I don't look good enough, and then if I don't look good enough, and I'm an imposter. I'm not good. I'm terrible. You saw me today. You walked in. You're like, oh, you're dressed up. I'm like, dude, I'm working. This is my job.
She looks great.
I gotta wear my nice clothes so I feel like I'm being professional. I'm doing my job, even though I'm swearing every 5 seconds. And it's like, I don't really need to. I could also be in my whatever. I could be wearing my bathrobe for all we care. But it is these interesting things and these rituals that we get stuck with.
And there's nothing wrong with wanting to look nice and feel good, right? Like,
I agree.
Like,
You're right.
You can want those things, but I think if it's making you feel bad, you need to ask yourself, like, really, where is this coming from? And those fundamental underlying assumptions. Where those come from. And I also think, like, I agree, it is a first world problem, but also there is a lot of effort put into trying to get us to spend tons of time thinking about these things. Because if we're thinking about these things, we're trying to buy things to fix our problems.
100%.
So it is
the external measures.
Yes.
Like you're saying.
Yes. It is not.
It's always come back to that.
It is not our fault. It is important to sort of recognize it when you can. If you're ready to work on it, great. If you're not ready to work on it, that's totally cool too. Like, everyone's at their own place.
Right. But we can also blame the Kardashians.
Sure.
It's not our fault, it's their fault.
Absolutely. Well, and blame, like, diet culture is like a $9 billion business or something like that. And then think about makeup and clothing and all that stuff to try to convince us that we need to be different. And I mean, I highlight my hair. I like to have blonde hair. I don't feel bad about that. I don't feel bad about it when I don't go for months at a time.
Yeah. COVID.
You know, like,
COVID.
yeah.
I had a unibrow throughout COVID, dude. I was like, well, I guess I can exist with a unibrow now.
Yeah, it's fine, right? But if it's making you feel bad, then I think it's worth exploring, like, why?
Yeah.
What's
that coming
behind
from?
that?
Yeah, exactly. Do you have any common myths that you would like to add to this list to bust today?
Well, we've already got into my weight loss thing.
Yeah.
I think if we talk about like parenting and nutrition, I think a lot of parents struggle because they feel like their children need to have like a quote perfect diet to be healthy.
Yes.
And so a lot of their stress comes from like trying to get kids to eat the way that they think they should eat.
Yeah.
And kids do not eat the way that we necessarily expect them to eat or want them to eat.
Yeah.
And as long as they're growing and healthy and happy and feeling good, you probably don't need to worry about it too much.
Yeah.
Offering them a variety of foods over the course of a week, they're going to eat a variety of foods over the course of a week. There's lots of different things that we could talk about, but I think I'd like parents to know that image of like they have to eat well so that they can be healthy. That is a myth. Let us think about children growing up in the 80s who ate like Tang and bologna sandwiches, and they're okay now still. So I think
I loved bologna sandwiches, by the way. Like, I don't know if I could even face eating it today, but man, that deli meat and that package, and you can see the juice, like the liquid in there. Oh, so nasty, but so good. But that's just, I appreciate this because I stress over it, because it's my stress. And like we said at the beginning, it's hopefully today some of us can get some feedback from you about what we can think about when we're projecting that. And that's how I feel sometimes. I'm projecting my own eating scares now onto my kids with, no, you can't have that, you gotta be healthy. And I struggle with when we as parents in particular can work so well as a village together. And we started that at the beginning, like you and Cam, and we live close to each other. We started to create this village of, okay, my kid gets to go to your place, your kid comes to mine, but we help each other out. I've been able to confide in you about some things, you've been able to confide in me, and or ask like, hey, does your kid, or how about this? And I really appreciate that, because I'm generally a very anxious person, and as parents, we want to break cycles, and we struggle with that. But I find parents are the judgiest of all. We judge each other's kids so much, and it's sad to see, because then we close doors with being able to reach out and talk. Like, I'd love to be able to ask, how do you get your kid to not have the pop, or what are some ways that you introduce that? But I won't, because I feel very judged.
Yeah, and I think a lot of other people's judgment comes from insecurity, right? They want, in general, I think we live in a society where people want guarantees. Yeah. And they're like, if I do everything right, then I am going to have a child that grows up to be this like perfectly healthy, wonderful person. And food is part of that. We show love for our children by preparing food for them.
Yes.
It's like a fundamental need as a parent to nourish your child.
That's right.
And that can come with a lot of stress. And especially if you have a child with really extreme pickiness or sensory issues or other things, it can be super, super stressful. Allergies for sure. It can be super stressful. And people do get judgy.
Yeah.
Or mother-in-laws. At the Mealtime Struggles class, it was always mother-in-laws that were causing the most problems. But I think you can't compare yourself to other people in general in life, right? You have to just do the best you can. What's your long-term goal for your child and their eating? Like, my goal for my kids was for them to grow up and have a healthy relationship with food.
Yeah.
And I'm not super concerned about the day-to-day. I did have to crack down at one point on some candy snacking in the bedroom that was happening.
Oh, yeah.
That I was like, listen, if you want to eat candy as your snack, okay.
Right.
I'm not going to tell you that I think that's the best snack you could choose, but you're old enough that you can make your own snack decisions. Meals, we still tend to make suggestions and we prepare supper and whatever, but you're old enough that you can choose your own snacks.
Yeah.
If you're going to have candy as a snack, you need to sit at the table and eat it.
Yeah.
well, that's boring. I was like, listen, snack is not fun time.
Yeah.
Snack is like just nourish your body time.
Right.
So you do what you want.
Right.
In terms of like what you're going to have for your snack, but it is going to be at this table.
Yeah.
Because it was just a habit of like snacking on candy for 2 hours, not paying any attention to it, and then coming to supper and not being hungry.
That's right. Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, but I want you to come to supper hungry, which means we need to change this grazing on candy for 2 hours habit, which is also not great for your teeth. I had a lot of cavities as a kid. I'm very sensitive to the teeth. So,
well, and it's the path to health, our mouth, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I hear you, yeah.
So we did change that, and we started, and I was like, no storing candy in your room, which I wasn't a fan of to begin with, but sometimes you got to let people experiment a bit with things.
Yeah.
I was like, candy needs to be in the kitchen. You can eat as much as you want, but you need to sit at the table and pay attention while you're doing it.
I like that, because it's exactly what you said around paying attention. This is why I asked the TV thing. Sometimes I wonder, we will eat supper as a ritual on Fridays or weekends, and sometimes we'll do it a little more during the week. And recently I was like, I don't feel like I feel guilty doing this, because one hand, like you said, we're not really talking, but it's watching movies is our family thing.
You're doing stuff together.
But I don't know if we're paying attention, right? Like I'm staring at the TV and I'm eating, so maybe I'm distracted and I'm overeating, or I'm not eating enough because I'm so intrigued by what's happening. And then I just feel worried sometimes, like the habits we're creating are exactly what you said around, well, now I'm not hungry, or now I'm still hungry and I'm going to go grab the Oreos or whatever it is. And I think sometimes I remember, so funny, it was Deepak Chopra when he was like trending back in the day. But I remember one of the things that I was listening to that he said was, it's very important that we give like eating is such an important part for we're nourishing ourselves. So when we're just standing and walking around and eating, we're not really paying attention to it going in and chewing it, as well as just taking a moment to eat. And so when we sit, we have an opportunity to be present while we're eating. And so I really appreciated that, because I'm like, yeah, that happens a lot. I'm walking around having a quick snack, and then I'm like, how did I had 6 of these candy bars or whatever it was because I'm not paying attention. But I bet if I was sitting and eating at the table, I'm opening it, I'm eating it. Okay, look at that. It's interesting. I'm either getting full or I'm getting bored of it or whatnot. So I appreciate what you're saying about, can we get out of the bedroom and sit at the table?
And that is one of the things we do in the focused eating exercises that I talked about at the beginning. Is you sit with your food in silence, and there's no TV and there's no phone and there's no anything.
Oh my gosh.
When I took the course, we had to do it as homework. And I was like, oh my God. And I do eat in front of my phone not at breakfast time. No, I eat in front of my computer at breakfast time because I often eat it at work.
Trying to get stuff done.
Yeah, and I'm like busy. And so supper is like the meal that I tend to focus on the most because I'm eating with my family. And then at work, actually, my coworkers are pretty good about taking lunch together too. So I try to do that a couple times a week as well. But you're right. If you sit down together and you talk, eating is social just as much as it is nutrition. But I would also say, like, not to feel anxious about it, but just to think about, okay, if this is something that's important to you that you want to change, maybe you start with doing it just a couple times a week. And maybe that's something that you work towards as a goal. Yeah. And it's not, there's no judgment. There's no like, oh, you should never do this or you should always do this. Yeah. It's just going to be, sometimes you're going to do it more. Sometimes you're going to do it less. Maybe you're like, oh, actually, we've gone back to eating in front of the TV a lot more than I want to. Right. Let's try to pick a few nights that we stick to, that we go to the table and eat together. It's good for kids' mental health. It's good to, it's associated with less drug use, less depression, less anxiety. Like there's so many benefits to it. Yeah. But also I think people get really hung up on, again, perfection. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I have to do it all the time. Yeah. Like, no, you don't.
It's all or nothing. Yeah.
We as a family have dessert most nights. Yeah. And we do that while we watch a show together. Yeah. But dessert is something that we mostly just have one portion of. Yeah. So that sort of like not paying attention isn't as much of an issue. Yeah. But I love the ritual of it. We sit down together. We pick a show. Right now we're watching Friends. Yeah. Together. Yeah.
It's like Modern Family for us.
Yes, we watched Modern Family too. So And I love that ritual piece too.
Yeah.
And that's what you're talking about with your supper. Like, these family rituals are important too.
Right.
So sometimes maybe you have dinner together in front of a movie, and sometimes you have dinner maybe at the table.
Yeah.
And there doesn't have to be one right way for everybody.
Yeah.
But just knowing that there are some big benefits associated with eating together as a family.
Yeah. You know, I just want to like say, I really appreciate this conversation so far, because how you talk, it's so clear that you're so passionate about your work. You're very knowledgeable. And I really feel how you talk has nothing to do with judgment. It's very much about, this is what I know, but I also am figuring these things out, as well as just making it feel so normal. I love hearing that from you, because it doesn't make me feel guilty telling you we eat around the TV a few times a week. And I like what you're saying. It's like, balance it and also pay attention to, is this working?
Yeah.
How is it helping? How is it not? As well as, can we pay attention to having, food around the table? How does that help us? I love that you're finding that balance in the middle of that all or nothing. And I hear that, and I would imagine that's how you're working with your clients, because if anyone's coming like me, it's all or nothing.
Yeah.
Which is going to bring me to diet culture.
Yes.
So we mentioned it a couple times. Can you help us understand, like, first of all, it's like a buzz little phrase. What is diet culture?
So to me, diet culture is the world that we live in that values thinness above pretty much everything else. And all of our sort of health messaging and nutrition messaging is focused around this underlying assumption that to be thin is to be healthy. And I actually think it's interesting how it's evolved over the years, because I think years ago there were diets, like in the 60s and 70s, we had like cabbage soup diets and all that kind of stuff. But people were really open about the fact that this was to make you thin. And now what we have is this culture where there's still diets. There's still fad diets. They're still trying to sell you something a lot of the time, sell you a diet book, sell you a meal pattern, a way of eating, but they call it health. And they're like, oh, it's for everyone. And what I really find alarming is that they often are selling it as like, this is the way to be healthy for your whole family, and including children, whereas it's really about being thin.
Yeah.
That's what they're trying to, but they call it being healthy. They equate thinness with health.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's so. So, can we talk about like how can we stop obsessing with it? Because it's like, being healthy, quote unquote, is so. I don't even know what it is anymore. And I hear you talking about what is healthy for you. Looking at different things, and I love what you're saying. Like, how does that make me feel? How does it make my body feel, my mind feel? Did I sleep well? All these sorts of things. When I eat those things and all sorts of things, where did it come from? Where's it stemming from? Where's my anxiety around eating stemming from? I appreciate hearing that, but like, is it possible for us to stop obsessing over it?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think it can take a lot of work, and you have to be able to be aware. I think, for starters, be aware that you're obsessing about it, and then try to figure out, where is this coming from? And some of it is coming from, like, the world wants us to be thin, and there is a lot of pressure to try to keep us that way. And
why do you think we still today, after having diagnoses and understanding there's eating disorders, all sorts of things that can complicate this whole diet fad, why do you think today we're still obsessing over it? Like, we have all this science, all this stuff behind it, and we're still sitting here saying, to do this diet, do that. Like, why? I don't know if that's a fair question. That's like my kid asking, why do we exist the other day? And I was like, dude, not at 9 o'clock at night. Ask me tomorrow.
Nice try. You still need to go to bed.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we know a lot more now, but also it is not black and white. There are a lot of health professionals out there who still think that to be thin is to be healthy, and that if you are in a bigger body, well, you just need to lose weight and then you'll be healthier. And it's in in our whole culture. When I was at South Health Campus, we had a class on intuitive eating. We did an introductory 3-class series, which still exists. If anybody wants to take it at South Health Campus, it's free. Just a little plug there for my colleagues at South Health Campus. But we had a little video clip that one of my colleagues had found on Chloe the cat in The Secret Life of Pets, obsessing over the food in the fridge, and she keeps coming and going and coming and going, and then she like binge eats the whole fridge, and then she's like lying on the ground, and then she sees cake, and he's like, and everybody laughs, and that's a kid's movie. It's everywhere in society. We can't be hard on ourselves when we ask ourselves, why are we still obsessed? Well, society is still obsessed. They are still actively working on pushing that messaging. Everywhere you turn around, that messaging is being shown to you. We, when the kids were little, tried to watch Kung Fu Panda, and the whole first part, and maybe it got better, I don't know, I've never seen it now.
I've actually never seen it either.
The whole first part was fat shaming the panda. And I was like, we have to turn this off. I can't deal. I can't deal with this panda being fat shamed. My kids are going to think that this is like a normal way to be treated. And it's everywhere. It's in all media. It's in TV. It's like people make jokes about it, but it's not funny. Yeah. So that's why we probably still feel that way, because there's still so much effort being put into trying to make us feel that way.
Yeah. So then it comes back to what then? What do we do?
I mean, I think we have to push back as much as we can, not participate in that kind of media. Like I don't follow anybody that promotes that kind of thing. I block everything I can find. When I worked at the spin studio, one of the reasons I wanted to work there is because they were very body positive.
Yes.
They never talked about like burn those calories in class, and have a Peloton membership. One of the reasons I chose them is because my daughter uses the programs, and they never talk about body size. They never talk about trying to lose weight. They never talk about any of that stuff. They are starting to have more body diversity in their instructors. I would say a few years ago, they were not quite so body diverse. It's getting better. I think we have to actively choose what we want to engage with and put our money towards those kinds of things, and then just calling it out and being able to point out when these things are being said. Even we said something about the dog being kind of round, and the kids were like, don't body shame the dog. I'm sorry, Coco.
Oh, Coco's so cute. Coco, I remember during COVID, you guys really, as a family, were getting into the baking scene.
Oh, yes.
And I love your stories about how Coco's a boxer.
Yes.
So she has a lot of personality, and how she'd find her way to steal some of the full-on baked loaves or cakes.
She's like progressed to eating full loaves of bread that we now had to get a bread bin that she couldn't open. And then we had to get, like, we have this penny jar that we shake when she does something bad. She's scared of it. Now the penny jar has to sit in front of the bread bin because she will like try to get it open. She loves baked goods. I feel like
Coco's
girl.
She's my soulmate. I'm with her. You have to put
she's...
penny jars on my stuff too. It's so cute. But I appreciate that, because you're right. It starts young. Like it's us sort of rewiring some of the things that we've been conditioned to believe and to think and to feel, and start to create a new dialogue or script with the younger generation. And like I said earlier, some of these younger kids are ahead of at least me, if not others as well, in a way of challenging that every day and asking, why is this way, or why is this that way? And I'm in a house with boys, and I think it's in many ways no different. For them, I agree, the pressure was a bit different being a girl, but I'm noticing with them, because of the superheroes and different chiseled video game players and all these things too. And so just striking at conversation out of curiosity about what they think, or what do they think is healthy. And it's interesting to hear a lot of the things that they say. And it was my oldest one day that had said, he was trying to make a case for getting a dog, and he had said, oh, well, like if I have a dog, then you guys won't think I'm fat, and I'll walk him more or her more. And so afterwards, Carrie and I have a little huddle, and we're like, holy fuck, like we've never told him he's fat, but clearly we are doing things and behaving in certain ways where he's picking up on, I can't be fat.
Yeah.
And so I was very, very grateful that came out, because it was a good reminder for us to sort of change how we talked around, and also personal anxieties, right? Around, okay, like, how do I keep this stuff in check and work with my kids? I'm not perfect at it, at least being open and honest about, I'm figuring this stuff out too. Let's figure it out together. I appreciate some of that. I also wanted to talk a little bit in terms of diet culture. Like, I'm going to give you an example. A couple months ago, my mom was here, and her and I had this really cute conversation. She had this observation, because she went out and bought grapeseed oil. And we're like, Mom, you can't use grapeseed oil anymore. Have you not read what they're saying about it? It's so unhealthy. We got you the ghee, like, use the ghee. And so she's, she doesn't listen to me, right? I've told her this before already. She's not listening to me. And so she says, it's interesting to me about how we're back to the ghee, because 15 years ago, 20 years ago, ghee was so fattening. True. And, this is
saturated fat.
And it's a cultural thing for us, right, to use it. And so it's like, oh yeah, so I can't use ghee. And then they told me I got to start using grapeseed oil. Now they're telling me that grapeseed oil is not healthy. So what's next? And so what are your thoughts about this back and forth of this fad of use this and then don't use this, and then it goes back to that feeling guilty piece?
Yeah. I think you got to eat what you want at the end of the day. Like, and I know that sounds really simple, but generally if you're making food, you're cooking the food, that food is nutritious food for the most part. The other thing I think I like to say is, like, everything we eat gives us something.
Yeah.
And so sometimes that something is nutrients, and sometimes that something is pleasure or memory or sheer enjoyment. And we need all of those things from our food. It can't just be about health. And I agree, there is a lot of back and forth. Nutrition research is not perfect.
Yeah.
We talked about that at the beginning.
Yeah.
Trends change.
Yeah.
So even though the nutrition research might not have changed, there can be a lot of media drive to be like, oh yeah, butter, bad.
Yeah, butter, margarine, the fake stuff that they had for a bit.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Right?
So I think it's important to not get too hung up on individual things, but just to think about the pattern and what do I want to eat.
Yeah.
I used to always use margarine. I kind of grew up with it. It's what I liked. And then my husband introduced me to using butter more. And then I was like, wow, this is really delicious.
So good.
And so we have both in our house.
Yeah.
The kids like margarine because it's spreadable and it's easier to put on things.
Yeah.
And I like butter to cook my scrambled eggs and to, like, spread on my little English muffins with jam,
so
like
yummy. I know.
And again, it's like, what's going to give you that enjoyment as well as the other things that you need from your food, like your nutrients and various other things. So I agree with her that there's a lot of it seems like there's a lot of back and forth, but I think sometimes it's just trendiness. And there's no one food that is the food that you should eat.
Well, we vilify it, right? Like, it becomes this villain of, oh, you can't have this, you can't have that. And then the gluten thing was big, and I'm not sure if this is still, I don't know, like, we're still on that? Because for a while there, no one had a gluten allergy, then everyone had one, and now I'm like, oh, okay, I don't know, like, what's going on? And so then we kind of vilify some of these things, right? So I wanted to just kind of ask you as well, as we talk about diet culture here, and you're a dietitian in your field, do you talk about this? Maybe you think about it. Do you find the words around eating and food primarily negative or positive? Like, do we need to change that word diet or redefine it?
Yeah, I think that generally people now see it as a fairly negative thing, but it really just means the way that we eat, right?
Yeah.
So maybe we just need to talk about the way that we eat more.
Yeah.
I think people, when they come and see me, tend to get very focused on, what do I need to cut? What do I need to restrict?
Yeah,
what do I need to eat less of? Or even just like they associate health with less.
Yes.
And so often I'm going to look at, okay, what do you need to eat more of? Like, what are you enjoying? How do we get you to move away from this, like, restriction mindset and more towards, how do you get enjoyment out of eating in a way that also doesn't make you feel anxious?
Yeah.
Because, right, that there's a bit of a balance there for people, and it's a work in progress for a lot of people.
True, right?
So I do think that it has negative connotations now. I think a lot of people, they'll be like, it's not a diet, it's a lifestyle.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm like, no, it's still a diet.
Right? Yeah.
Like, you're still trying to put people on a diet.
Yeah, yeah. I was totally conditioned with this is the lifestyle, totally. And then it's like, why is this not working anymore?
Yeah.
Why do I keep hating every time I gotta eat? I hate this because I want to go have the Slim Fast shake over there, and I'm also lactose intolerant, so that's not working well, right? So it's like, what am I doing? And you think things are working or not, or we convince ourselves, and like you said, right, this how many billion-dollar industry of making this money off of us, and many of us are suffering because grapeseed oil, not grapeseed oil, I'm allergic to this, I'm not allergic to this. And so I want to kind of move into, with all that I've mentioned my anxiety like 100 times. And so I'd love to talk a little bit with you about nutrition and mental health. So can you tell us your thoughts about how they're connected?
I mean, they're so connected. But I think a lot of it, people think of nutrition and mental health as what I need to eat needs to be different to improve my mental health. And I would say that it often starts with how you eat.
Oh, there's the how.
But what you eat is important, sure. Like, not going to discount that, but people tend to jump there too quickly.
Yeah.
And I think we often need to start thinking about first the hows and the whys before we get into the what. And by focusing on the hows and the whys, maybe we can help reduce some of the anxiety around eating. Yes, some of it's around food choice, but some of it's around food behavior. I don't want to eat too much, or yes. I don't want to eat this thing, and I don't want to eat in front of people, or people make comments about my eating, or people are pressuring me to eat things I don't want to eat. And right. So we have to kind of deal with some of that stuff first, and figuring out how to be less anxious that way before we can really get into the what.
Okay. How do we do that?
I mean, it's hard, right? It's not, there's no easy answer, and it's not going to be the same for everyone. I do think the what can be important, but it's so tied into, people will come and you're like, okay, well, you're only eating one meal a day. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Well, they feel really anxious about preparing food, for example, or they feel so stressed they don't feel hungry. And so then we're like, okay, well, let's work a little bit on, maybe at first you're going to eat when you're not hungry, because you're going to build some of those habits in. And there's some research around, like, cooking and baking can actually be helpful in reducing anxiety. That act of creation can be really helpful. People feel anxious because they don't know how to cook. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to meal plan. They don't know. They feel lost. Yes. Right? And so working on some of those things can be really helpful. But I think also just acknowledging that there isn't one right way. Yeah. And everybody wants one right way.
The pill.
Yes.
The supplement that we can take that fixes everything.
Yeah. And there isn't one right way. We all have to just figure it out, how we feel good and what feels good for our family, ourselves.
Right.
And that's probably the best. Now, there are dietitians who specialize in nutrition and mental health. Okay. And they could probably go into more detail in terms of the nutrients, specific things around that. That's not really my area of expertise. Right. So I would tend to focus more on your eating behavior. Yeah. Developing what they call, like, eating competence.
What does that mean?
It means you can eat in a way that feels good to you, basically, and nourishes your body. And then you're eating competent. It doesn't cause you tons of anxiety. It's not stressful, and you're able to get what you need to feel good. And so that's what I would tend to work on with people. I don't do a lot of work with eating disorders. That would be a different area of practice, and that would be something they would have different methods of helping with, like, eating disorders and mental health. Right. But for sort of more general things, I would just start with eating behavior and helping you to understand that you don't have to be perfect.
Yeah. I like that. Is sleep and, like, our mood, like, do those play a factor? And so if I ate something that's not really, because I'm learning how you're talking. So if let's say I eat a full pizza, which didn't work for me. Maybe it works for my brother. It doesn't work for me. I ate it because I had to. It was so good. And then I feel shitty afterwards. Am I conditioning myself to think that I'm feeling shitty? Am I feeling shitty?
Yeah, like maybe you're too full, right?
Yeah. Like, so what, I guess my question is, where can I start, or what can I pay attention to so I can start to ask myself those questions, like, of how am I feeling?
I would often encourage people to start at meals and starting small. Like, so if you're someone that eats in front of a screen all the time,
yeah,
maybe you start with 1 minute and you set a timer and you eat for 1 minute without a screen.
Oh.
And you just really pay attention to how you feel. Sometimes I encourage people to serve themselves small portions, not to restrict their eating, but because it provides a natural break. And then they can stop and be like, how do I feel? Do I feel full? Do I feel satisfied? Which is different than feeling full, right? Have I had enough? Do I want more? It only works if they're willing to get more, though. Yeah. Sometimes people they can't do that right away, because they're like, no, I ate the full plate, that's enough. And you're like, no, it might not be, though. Yeah. So just doing some of those exercises where you just focus on what you're doing and see how you feel. And then I don't know about you, but not that we're old, but I have found that I cannot eat late at night anymore. I used to be able to eat poutine at 2 a.m. and be fine. Yeah. And now I'm like, not able to eat things at 9:30 p.m. because it does impact my sleep. I think that's real. That's just like my body is like, no, don't do that.
Because it's like digesting, it's working. I guess. All sorts of gases, all sorts of things are happening. And
I know my grandpa, when he was still with us, couldn't eat at a certain point past 6 p.m. because he said he could not sleep.
Yeah.
And fair enough, right? You know, so I think those things are real. Yeah. And you need to pay attention to those. But is this actual, like, physical? Is this emotional? If it's emotional, like, that's okay. But asking yourself those questions a little bit, or working with someone to ask those questions. Yeah. How did that make you feel? Right. And not being judgmental of yourself. I feel like I'm being a broken record about that.
Sometimes we need, repetition, right? They say gotta say it 7 times before it kicks in. But I hear a lot of what you're saying is learning how to be attuned to myself.
Absolutely.
Attuned to my body, attuned to my mind. And I also hear you saying, if I don't feel good after eating that full pizza, asking myself, do I not feel good because I feel guilty I ate it? Or because I physically am not feeling good? Is it impacting me in a different way? Because sometimes it's like guilt. I don't feel good because I shouldn't have had that. I shouldn't have had that cake at Christmas or whatever it was. Those kinds of anxieties that we get. And lot of times I know for someone like me, it's guilt. Yeah. I don't physically feel bad.
And shame.
Guilt and shame. Oh my God, the 2 terrible, terrible ones, man. But that's exactly it. And that will make me lose my sleep, and that'll mentally sort of mess me up, because now I'm fixating, like you said, all that space up there about why did I eat it versus whatever, I ate it for a reason, and figuring out why. I loved it. It was so good, though. It tasted good.
I know. I used to give this example to people with office birthday cake, because there would be a birthday cake at the office, and they would be like, oh, I shouldn't have it. Yeah. Oh, I shouldn't have it. And they'd be like ruminating on this birthday cake, and then eventually they go and they eat a huge volume of birthday cake, and they don't feel good because they ate probably a huge volume of birthday cake, and also they feel that guilt and shame, I shouldn't have done that. And then asking them to say, okay, next time you're in that situation, take that birthday cake right away. Don't ruminate on it, don't stress over it. Just, does it look good to you? Great. Sit down and eat the birthday cake, but really focus on, does this taste good? And if it tastes good, you should eat every bite and just enjoy the fact that you're eating this delicious birthday cake. And if it doesn't taste good, which often it might not, you just try to think about throwing it out, or eating it still if that's what you want to do, but then like really acknowledging to yourself that I didn't really enjoy that much. And then next time you're in that situation, same thing. It takes practice, right? Like to break that habit of like I shouldn't, I'm going to do it as quickly as possible so that I can not notice that that's what I'm doing.
100%.
And instead just trying to break into like, okay, I'm going to do this and I'm going to sit and I'm going to focus on it and I'm going to just enjoy the hell out of it.
Yeah.
And then great. And often people find it doesn't taste as good as they thought, or it does taste as good as they thought, and then great. You just had a delicious little snack.
Right.
To celebrate somebody's birthday.
Totally. Yeah. Very well said, because I don't know about anyone else, but when I've been in that situation, I'm just ruminating on it all day.
Yes.
Oh, that cake, or whatever it is. And exactly what you said. And even a step further, that shame, eating in isolation.
Yes.
Because sometimes it's like this pressure of, oh, I take care of myself, so I'm not going to eat that cake. I'm healthy. Like that's, I've been tricked by that. I've done that where it's like, no, I'm on this diet. Mm-hmm. I'm not eating carbs or whatever it is I'm not eating. And also making other people in the room probably feel shitty or whatever. But it's like, I'm better than everyone. I don't eat that. And then later on, I'm going to eat fucking 3 pieces of it, right? And it's like thinking back of those things, it's like that's where a lot of that shame was coming from versus what you said, go head on, walk towards it versus avoiding it. And I think that's about patterns in our lives. Food is a good example of probably patterns and where that comes up in other places. I'm going to avoid it, and then I'm going to go hard on whatever it is. I'm not going to talk to you, and then when I do, I'm going to yell at you or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really nice point. I've never thought of what you've said today. I've never really thought of it that way.
Yay!
So I really, really appreciate that. No, it's been a very refreshing conversation and lots of things to take from what you said about, oh, okay, I can go and think about this and apply it with my kiddos as well, because I'm like, oh, I could do things different. And I think exactly what you're saying is not feeling crappy that I did those things or said those things, but okay, moving forward, can I look at it in a different way? So I appreciate that.
Great.
Yeah. Anything that maybe I didn't ask you today that you were hoping to really cover with us, or a point that you want to go back and make?
I think we covered a lot of stuff here.
We usually do.
My favorite kind of topics. I just think I really want people to feel good in their own bodies and about the way they eat. I guess one point I'd like to make is the worst thing that we have done is tie nutrition and exercise to how our body looks.
Yeah, for
sure. And one of the things I like to work on with people is working on separating some of those things that you can nourish your body and you can move your body in a way that feels good to you.
Yeah. And
the way that you look is not necessarily going to change. And I think so many people get caught up in this societal message that your body is 100% within your control at all times. You can control how it looks at all times. And if you just ate better and you exercised more, you would be totally fine. Mm-hmm. And good health is a privilege that not everyone gets to enjoy.
That's right.
So it's really one of my missions, I guess, is to try to separate those things and really focus on how can I help you feel good about the way that you're eating?
Yeah.
If you want to change the way that you're eating, no problem. How can I help you do that? And then finding people, helping people figure out movement in a way that works for them. I'm not a personal trainer or a physiotherapist, but I do try to help. If people want to talk about those things, I'll talk about those things with them and then try to point them towards people that I know are body positive and are going to be really supportive and helpful and not judgmental or trying to get them to look a certain way or do a certain thing, like to focus on what the client's goals are.
Yeah.
But I think if we can separate movement and food from looks, we'd be doing really well.
Yeah, I agree. Well said. So can you provide us a call to action for our, this is where I always say I let the guests do my job for me. What is something, like you said, we covered a lot of things today. And so what is one thing that you can ask our listeners to maybe consider or even an action that they can go and do?
I think I would ask people to try to notice how often you speak about yourself and the way that you eat in a negative way. And whether it's thinking it or saying it out loud, and trying to do some reframing where you can be more positive about it. I think that can do a lot. Just noticing the habit of how many times a day you might be like, oh, shouldn't have done that, or I'm like, I feel so terrible because I did this or ate this, and so I guess that would be my call to action. And I know I'm gonna have to.
Oh, I love it too. No, I appreciate it.
And asking questions about assumptions, like, where did that come from? Why do you think that? Not just accepting everything at face value, but really digging into that a little bit more.
I like that. Thank you for that. Drop your plug. Where can people get in touch with you if they want to talk to you more? I know you have an Instagram site. I think you have a website as well. So where can we get in touch with your Howenutritious?
Yeah, so Instagram is an easy way. I have a Facebook page. I'm listed. I don't actually have my own website right now because it's on my to-do list.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
But I am listed on a website called Dietitian Directory, as well as another one that's called Online Nutrition. And you can find my profile on either of those websites, and those are great resources. You won't just find me, you'll find other people too. So maybe you want to work with someone different with a different background. Yeah. Those are two places. But yeah, you can connect through Instagram or what Facebook. Is your Instagram? It's at Howenutritious, and Howe is HOWE.
Okay, perfect. And I will also have it up too for people. Perfect. So just, great. I want to thank you. Thank you so much for coming and sitting with me this evening and talking to me. You left me with a lot of, I should think about that. and I'm really hoping the listeners also feel that way too. And for our listeners, thank you so much for your support and for continuing to listen. As you know, I always say these conversations are door openers. So if there's something more you want to hear about this topic, you're interested in, Sarah's let you know where you can get in touch with her. And if you like, you can get in touch with me as well at MFU Podcast on Instagram. Or you can email us at info@mfupodcast.com. Otherwise, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
It's lovely having you.